Mr. Sanis, could you tell me when, where, and why you decided to infiltrate FBI's clandestine bombing and other terrorist activities inside the United States?
Yes. On the evening of March 4th, as I mentioned earlier in this recording, 1970, I was a few blocks away at 47th and University Way, and I picked up two newspapers, as I always did every day, the Seattle Times and Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and I was reading their lead articles about a bombing that had taken place about 5 minutes after 10 on the night before, on the 3rd. And as I read the accounts in both the Seattle Times and the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, it didn't add up. Because at that time I was putting the last touches on completion of a construction project that I had designed and was in charge of building. That is a facility called the District, a very large nightclub, seating and standing over 800 people at a time. It was the nearest watering hole to the University of Washington campus. And as I read the accounts, as an expert in bombing, explosives, incendiaries, of every kind of counter-espionage trick in the world, been highly trained, and having had 3 tours of combat utilizing these skills, having built over 1,500 bombs minimum for the National Security Agency to protect our communications equipment and codes in the Republic of Vietnam over that 3-tour of duty period in 1966, 1967, and early 1968, I knew something about espionage and counter-espionage. Having spied on the White House for over 20 months, only the White House Communications Center information that was top secret and mentioned Vietnam War. But having that experience, I knew the newspaper stories didn't add up. There were 12 waiting policemen from the Seattle Police Department who arrested the 4 bombers at a few minutes after 10. The problem was with that is that I was building 2 shifts a day, and I knew that at 10 o'clock the university district only had 1 patrol car, 2 men operating, because they came by my construction site many, many times over the previous months. I knew that the University of Washington, which had the 4th largest police force in the state of Washington, had ample patrol units around the campus itself and the nearby streets. So to have 12 Seattle policemen staked out and waiting, I knew that a tip had been called in. And they were responding to a tip. And it had to be a very good tip to have 12 people waiting in ambush for bombers. I also knew that when 12:35 the night before, one of the bombers had been released on his own personal recognizance, a man named Jeffrey Paul Desmond, I knew that he had to be the informant inside the group. And I knew that this was a bombing that had actually injured an employee of the United States Postal Department in that bomb. And I knew that that was very unusual. And I wanted to find out what it was and what about it was unusual. So after having a late evening breakfast, I walked down to the University of Washington post office and started to investigate it. It wasn't roped off. It wasn't taped off. It was easy to investigate it. And I knew within minutes that a very highly powerful dynamite bomb had been used because of the nature of the broken concrete foundation. So I walked back to the University of Washington, got in my car, drove down, got my rock hammer out of the trunk, and began chipping at it, and figured from my field testing of it, the concrete, that it was over 4,000 psi concrete that had been blown. And at that point, I decided to go find out who bought the dynamite. And the next morning, I did that. By the next afternoon, I knew from having cold called in my fictitious role as a senior FBI agent in Washington, D.C., I cold called all of the places in Western Washington that sold dynamite. And I found a woman who answered the phone at the Harvey Powder Company at the Snohomish County Airport. She told me that she had sold the dynamite. She had sold dynamite to Maud Desmond, who was the mother of Jeffrey Paul Desmond, and had sold it at the direction of a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent who showed us identification to her, and that was Lewis M. Harris, Jr. I decided shortly thereafter to investigate Lewis M. Harris, Jr. and the FBI and its connection with that bombing and others.